This is The Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, produced by the WeAct Radio Network in Washington, D.C., and broadcast across the nation. Visit us online at thisisthezerohour.com or at youtube.com/thezerohour. Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Eskow.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Zero Hour. You know, if I had to give it a name, I guess I would call this episode Technology, Monopoly, and Destiny. We're standing in a moment in history when we're shaping our future economically, technologically, through the environment, through computer technology. These forces are shaping our worlds in ways we can't even begin to imagine. And that's one of the reasons why we have this show. And it's one of the focuses we're going to have for today's show. We're going to be talking about Bill Gates and his distorting effect on the entire education system, how his giving is driving education policy in this country off track. We're going to talk about fracking and the environment and tar sands and how people in small communities could sometimes make a huge difference in our future and what's being done to help them or to stop them. We're going to talk about what our friend Mark Ames calls the tectopus, the Silicon Valley monopoly that's ruling us. We're going to talk about it a couple different ways in terms of privacy, in terms of how they've been fixing wages for many years, and in terms of what we can do to stop them, and whether or not we should take dramatic steps like regulating them or nationalizing them. So we're going to talk about a lot of these issues. We're also going to be talking about the right's mad assault on Social Security. We're going to be talking about a lot. We're going to do a special feature on John Boehner and his lawsuit against the president. And I guarantee you that my commentary will have something to offend everybody. But before we get to any of that, a pop quiz for you. Quiz is this: which bank is widely considered too big to fail and to manage, needed and got a $45 billion loan during the financial crisis, recently failed a stress test from the Federal Reserve, and yet has enjoyed a revolving door relationship with both the Clinton and Obama administrations? If you answered Citigroup, congratulations. Citigroup is back in the headlines as the result of a new settlement with the Justice Department over its extensive mortgage fraud. Reportedly, the sum of that deal is going to be $7 billion. It's being trumpeted as a major win for the American people, but it's not. The money's not enough, and I'm guessing that some of it probably won't be paid out at all. The wrong people are paying for it, and once again, there will be no prosecutions for criminal behavior. From a moral perspective, the lack of prosecutions is probably the worst aspect of the deal. We keep making deals like this. Somehow the Justice Department does one deal after another to resolve massive criminal charges without indicting a single criminal. Who do they think commits these crimes? Slender Man? And yet, in this case, what we've got is what Senator Elizabeth Warren has called the Citigroup clique in Washington. They're powerful. They're everywhere, especially on the Democratic side. Citigroup didn't even exist until a merger that took place in 1999, announced in 1998, even though it was illegal at the time. But the people who put it together were confident that the Clinton White House and the Republicans in Congress would come through for them. As one of the CEOs said at the time, we've had enough discussions to believe that this will not be a problem. It wasn't. Congress passed a law. The Treasury Secretary, Robert Rubin, pushed a lot of exemptions. It was a very bipartisan law. Only 16 Republicans voted against it. Democrats voted for it 138 to 69. Bill Clinton signed that law, repealing Glass-Steagall, among other things, and declared in 1999, and I quote President Clinton, that financial services firms will be authorized to conduct a wide range of financial activities, allowing them the freedom to innovate in the new economy. President Clinton also said, quote, and I quote, removal of barriers to competition will enhance the stability of our financial services system, end quote. How did that work out for you? Of course, all the people involved did very well for themselves. Phil Gramm, who shepherded this bill through the Senate, got rich. Robert Rubin got even richer as a senior executive and later as CEO of the newly created Citigroup. And let's face it, President Clinton did pretty well for himself, too. The rest of the country, not quite as well. Homeowners, investors were massively defrauded by Citigroup, among others. The economy was shattered by the gambling on Wall Street. And Citi received its $45 billion emergency loan while Rubin was the CEO. The rest of us are still paying the price for Wall Street's actions in lost wages, lost wealth, and lost jobs. At this point, you may be thinking, well, at least this latest settlement restores some semblance of justice towards Citigroup, right? I mean, $7 billion. It's a lot of money, isn't it? Well, there are different ways to answer that question, but one answer is not compared to the $10 billion, which was originally supposed to be the government's settlement demand. I guess there's always a possibility they might have prearranged this number and then pretended to negotiate. You know, the government asked for 10 billion, the bank offers 4 billion, which is what it's off, which it did offer, and then they split the difference because this is exactly in the middle. But even if that's not the case, the fact that they did come out in the middle suggests it's a negotiation of two parties with equal leverage and equal right and wrong. Is that what it's come to here? Is that what we've got? That it's a tie, it's a draw between the United States government and the mega bank it allowed itself to create? Story gets even worse when you try to break open the 7 billion, because a certain percentage of that is going to be given in the form of what they call consumer relief rather than hard dollars. Banks have pulled this trick before. They tell you they're going to give out all this consumer relief, but then they count money they were renegotiations they were going to do anyway. They lower a debt amount or a loan amount by a certain number that benefits them by making the debt more payable. They were going to do it anyway, but they counted against this magical and untrue number. So there's not, look, to believe these numbers, you have to believe that the guys who committed the fraud in the first place are going to be honest about telling you how they're making up for the fraud. Does that sound like a good deal to you? Citigroup was one of the worst actors in all of this mortgage fraud. They committed some of the worst risks, took some of the riskiest loans, did some of the most egregious examples of defrauding investors. And once again, nobody gets indicted. It's like these crimes committed themselves. If you don't indict a criminal banker for committing his crimes, he has no reason not to commit them over and over. You're not even asking these bankers to give back the money they earned through these illegal and deceptive actions. So who's going to stop, right? If you can make money doing something that's wrong and illegal and you never get punished for it, and you get to keep the money even if you get caught, you're going to keep doing it. And who pays in the end? Who's going to pay for this settlement? The same investors in Citigroup stock who were defrauded in one of the cases that led to a previous settlement. So unless they were smart enough to unload their Citigroup stock right away, the people who were defrauded by these bankers will be picking up the tab, the very people who defrauded them. Does that sound to you like justice? It sure doesn't sound like justice to me, but that's what we're up against. That's what happens when something like the Citigroup clique and the Wall Street clique is still riding high in Washington, and that's one of the reasons we're in trouble today. I'm Richard R.J. Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour. And we are back on the Zero Hour. You know, the internet is a wonderful thing. I'm on it right now as we talk because, as you know, just like Brian Williams, I got my laptop open here to show that I'm, for those of you who are watching on our YouTube channel, which we encourage, it shows that I am very busy researching my projects and my stories, even as we go. Here's one thing to be found on the internet in the SoundCloud, as they call it. This is a secret recording made at Coca-Cola during a anti-union meeting that they were holding for the workers down south. It was recorded just recently, July 9th. That's this week in Atlanta, GA, at the South Metro Distribution Center in College Park. What you're going to hear, the leader of this Sound Clips discussion we're going to jump into in a minute, is Coca-Cola's Director of Labor Relations. His name is Bryant, LaVelle. And his assistant, and they're going to be talking at what was a mandatory, quote unquote, information session about the Teamsters' attempt to organize Southern Coca-Cola workers. So let us go behind the scenes into the secret meeting held this week at Coca-Cola. Pete, we got a clip or two from this. Let's hear one.
Now, they may claim they want to represent you and give you a voice in the workplace, but at least my experience is, at the end of the day, it's all about the money. And I've had union representatives tell me, it's not that I'm going to see the brothers and sisters at Coca-Cola or my represented employees or my members. I'm going to the Coke account today. I got to go to the Pepsi account today. Sometimes they don't even say Coke or Pepsi. I got to go to the red account today or the blue account today. It's what
All
it
right, let's
becomes.
stop
The
for a
numbers.
second. Let's stop for a second. So Brian LaVelle here is they've forced their workers in to a meeting so that they can talk against the attempts to organize these Coca-Cola workers. Oh, and his complaint is it's all about the money, because we know, of course, that Coca-Cola is an enterprise that's run strictly for the love and goodwill that they seek to get, and the good karma that they hope to accrue for future lives. Of course, it's all about the money, Brian LaVelle. Of course, it's all about the money, Coca-Cola. Workers aren't getting enough. That's why our economy is in the tank. That's why we need to raise the minimum wage. That's why we need more unions. That's why we need more and higher standards of living for the middle class. That's why we need to bring the middle class back. Brian LaVelle, Coca-Cola, it's all about the money. What else do we have?
I got to go collect dues from the rent account. That's just my experience. That's what I've heard from the unions themselves, those that work at the unions. So we want everybody to kind of go in eyes wide open, right? Your choice, your decision.
Back of each one.
Just want everybody to understand that the unions
The
are
only
in
thing there
business.
is
Yeah.
So we're getting a little crosstalk, but he's saying, he's obeying the law. He's saying your choice, but remember, this was a mandatory meeting. These people weren't asked, do you want to come in and hear the company's side of it? And they're scared. They're worried because, when you take, I know I've been in business, when you take a large group of people or multiple large groups of people and put them in a mandatory meeting where they're not working, you're paying them. That means that you're losing a lot of money. You are investing a lot of money in trying to bust a union movement. What else? I know we had some pushback from some of the workers at the session, but let's hear a little more of what we've got here.
Just we need to be as far as you talk about the unions and stuff like that.
That's how it doesn't matter. It's my job. I work for Cove, just like you did, right?
So
You don't pay for my salary.
I didn't quite hear the question, but they were asking him, I guess, why he's doing this. This is my job. I work for Coke just like you do. They pay my salary. Okay, we get it. And you're trying to earn it to the best of your ability. You didn't know you were being recorded. Brian LaVelle, Coca-Cola Director of Labor Relations. Let's hear a little more.
Card real quick. I just want to point out something. This card, this is not signing it to say you will get more money or you will get more vacation time or better benefits. All this card is doing is saying, I want the union to represent me and come and ask for stuff. Basically, what you're turning over is your right for the union to ask for stuff on your behalf. And as Denise talked about, we won't get into it here because we could spend 3 days talking about the collective bargaining process because it's pretty complex. It's not as simple as the union may be telling you or you may have heard. We come in, we ask, we get. Everything is negotiable. As Denise said, you can get more, less, or the same based on what you currently have, right? You get more pay, but lose vacation. You could get better health benefits, but lose pay. It's all negotiations. Nobody knows what the outcome is until the contract is signed, and the company and the union, keep in mind, I say the company and the union say, okay, we have the deal.
So, okay, what he's trying to do here, obviously, is confuse them. Is telling the workers at Coca-Cola, gee, you might get more money, you might get less, and you're signing away your right to negotiate with us. That's another line. I love it when companies say, do you really want to sign away your right to negotiate with us? Let me ask the audience here, how many of you have applied for jobs? And I'm not talking about executive jobs here. I'm talking about working jobs. I'm talking about, like my first few jobs, warehouse or whatever. How many of you applied for jobs and were said, okay, now let's negotiate your salary? Really? You think so? Okay, now let's negotiate your vacation benefits. Let's talk about your health benefits. Let's negotiate how much is covered, how much is not covered, your deductible, your copay. How many of it? Look, I used to do this work. I used to analyze health plans for unions during the negotiation process to see how much would it be worth if you traded away one type of benefit, say add a $40 copay for an office visit in return for 25 cents more per hour. I've done all those calculations. I know how this thing works. Brian LaVelle is right. It's complicated, but he's trying to talk down to them. He's trying to scare them. He's trying to confuse them. It's complicated, but when you have somebody negotiating on your behalf for the entire workforce, no matter how complicated it gets, you come out better. Let's see what else we got here. That's all we have. Okay. Well, listen, and I guess the moral is this. Coca-Cola is running scared. Workers want to know, why aren't they being allowed to easily organize down south as similar workers are organized in the rest of the country? Why is Coca-Cola delaying this process, confusing this process? There's another angle of it that I'd like you guys to think about too, which is this. For many, many years, it was known Coca-Cola was the Democratic soft drink. Pepsi was the Republican soft drink. When I used to work in big corporations, when Coca-Cola would come in for a presentation on their health insurance or their workers' comp insurance or anything else we might do for them in one of my companies, it was actually interesting because when Coke would come in, one of the things that was done by the sales team was they made sure that every vending machine on every floor of the building had all the Pepsis taken out and Coca-Cola put in. No Pepsi products anywhere in the building. And you better be damn sure when you walk into that meeting to give your part of the presentation on whatever it is you do, Richard Eskow on floor 16, that you better be carrying a can of Coca-Cola. If Pepsi comes in next week, all the Coca-Cola machines all the Coca-Cola cans get taken out of the machines. And by the way, you better know what's Pisani water, who makes that, and the other products too, so that you get it right. But the other thing that was known, Jimmy Carter becomes president, Coca-Cola is going to open a plant in the Soviet Union, as it was then. Ronald Reagan becomes president, Pepsi-Cola is going to open a plant somewhere. It's just the way it worked. My point in all of this, if Coca-Cola is still identified in any way with the Democratic Party, and I haven't been in the corporate world for more than a decade now or more, but if Coca-Cola is still identified with the Democratic Party, you might want to ask them and their friends in the party establishment, why are you acting anti-union? Why aren't you representing this core constituency that the Democratic Party is supposed to stand for, which, of course, is working people? So that's question number one. Question number two for Coca-Cola, what's wrong with unionized workers? What's wrong with the unionized workforce? You know, in the peak years of this country, in the years when things were going best, there was much greater unionization in the private sector than we have today. And I'm talking about the 50s when the economy was growing. I'm talking about the 60s when the economy was booming. I'm talking about the times when the places I grew up, the places where a lot of people I knew grew up, were booming. Those places that are like ghost towns now. The house I was born in is abandoned. The town I grew up in is half ruins, basically. Empty factories everywhere you look. There was a time we had a unionized middle class, and there was a time we had a healthy, prosperous middle class. Now, I don't want to oversimplify, but unions can make us prosperous. Coca-Cola, why are you against that? Why are you giving them a hard time? Let these workers organize. Let them do what they need to do. And by the way, you know me, I'm always ragging on the big internet companies, but I'll close by saying this. This is one of the things I love about the internet, and this is one of the things I love about new technology. You can't bully people in secret anymore the way you used to. We have things like secret recordings on cell phones. We have things like the internet, SoundCloud, and other places where you can upload you recorded and share it with the public. This is what they call surveillance from below, and I'm all for it. We're going to keep our eye on Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola workers, you keep your iPhones and your other recording devices charged and ready, and we'll be here to work with you. I'm Richard R.J. Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour. And we are back on The Zero Hour. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, which for some reason I wound up pushing heavily this time, I don't mean to, but if you watch, you just saw me typing on my laptop there. It looked just like, those really professional guys on MSNBC and NBC and CNN and Fox and all that. I love the way they're always typing there, that Brian Williams thing. I just don't have the hair. But anyway, listen, we got serious things to talk about. Social Security disability insurance. In particular, our next guest is Rebecca Vallas. Rebecca is the Associate Director of the Poverty to Prosperity Program at the Center for American Progress. Try saying that 3 times fast. In this capacity, she plays a leading role in the Center's anti-poverty policy development and analysis, and she's recently written and co-authored an excellent piece on the current state of Social Security disability insurance. You're hearing a lot of scare talk and hysteria, and frankly, I think scapegoating of disabled Americans on the right. And Rebecca is here to talk to us about that situation. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, and I appreciate your intro. Could not agree more with the way you just framed that.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that because, it's become so overheated. And one of the things I really appreciated about your piece on this was it just brought some sanity to the debate. There's a lot we could talk about. Number one was you compared, and I think this is so important for Americans to understand when we hear talk about somehow these programs are generous. That's one of the code words we hear. How does, and one of the things you addressed was, how does the United States disability program compare with that of similar countries?
I agree completely. I think it's a really important comparison, and I think it's something that often is entirely missing from the debate that we hear about vital programs like Social Security disability insurance. The fact is that the United States has one of the strictest disability standards and set of eligibility criteria in the entire world. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD as it's usually called, they do an annual ranking. They actually take a look at how countries around the world structure their disability benefit systems. And so when they compare the United States disability insurance program with comparable programs around the world, what they find is that we actually have not only one of the strictest standards in the entire world, as I said, but also one of the least generous programs. They rank us all the way at the bottom. The only country that has a least generous disability benefit program than we do is Korea.
And so, if it weren't such a serious problem, I'd be tempted to repeat that old joke about such terrible food and such small portions. It's so hard. It's so hard to get into this program. We make it so difficult. And then we give so little for people who are disabled, clearly through no fault of their own. One of the other things we hear, and I think I love that you make the point about the difficulty getting in, because there's so much scare talk that they're freeloaders and so on, when really we're very tough about those sorts of things. And in terms of those benefits, one of the things that keeps coming up on the right as an attack on the program is something that actually the right originally celebrated, which was the idea that we should give people incentives when they're disabled to get back to work. Mm-hmm. So if you're receiving disability insurance, but you're able to, let's say, learn a new line of work that if you're not capable of doing the old one, you can learn a new one. You can collect some benefits as you begin to earn money. That gives you an incentive to push yourself back into the workforce, perhaps by learning a new skill or physical therapy, whatever it might be. So now the right is attacking that, aren't they?
Well, the fact of the matter is, as you said, it's incredibly difficult to qualify for benefits. Only people with the most severe illnesses and the most significant disabilities are the ones who qualify. It's not a catch-all program for anyone who has a disability. And actually, most people who apply for the program are actually denied, and fewer than 4 in 10 are approved, even after all levels of appeal. So I think, you take a look at the facts and you realize it's actually incredibly hard to get benefits. The way I like to say it is, it's hard to get on and it's hard to live on. And so that takes us to the second point that you made, that the benefits are just so incredibly stingy. They actually only replace less than half of pre-disability income for the typical worker. So, nobody would choose to go on disability if they were able to continue working. And when you take a look at who the beneficiaries are, who the people are who actually meet that strict disability standard, you find that they're people with significant disabilities, serious illnesses, chronic heart failure, cancers, emphysema, kidney failure, and so forth. And so it's actually no surprise that about 1 in 5 Social Security disability insurance beneficiaries die within 5 years of getting benefits. And that doesn't even count the thousands who die each year waiting to be approved. So as I said, it's hard to get on, and then it's hard to live on.
Which is another disgrace. The fact that they have to wait because not enough money is being budgeted to get these applications reviewed and these benefits to them. And then speaking of the money side of it, the latest wave of hysteria we hear and misleading language is, oh, the disability trust fund is going to go bankrupt. It's running out of money. All that means is that the surplus, once it's gone, even if we did nothing, we could still pay 80% of benefits, but there are very simple things we can do, and you address that a little bit. So let's try to clear up a little bit of the scare talk and talk about what is the projected shortfall and what can we do to fix it.
So, as you noted, something that has actually been projected going back to about 1995 was that the Social Security Disability Insurance Trust Fund would have its reserves depleted by the year 2016. So, as you noted, and as I'm going to repeat because I think it bears repeating, this is not something that was unforeseen. This is not a new development in the program. We've known going back to 1995 that we were going to face this situation. But also worth people understanding is that this is not an unprecedented situation. This is something that has come up 11 times in the history of Social Security in this country. And each time that it's come up, Congress has done what has basically become routine housekeeping for the Social Security programs, which is to rebalance the trust funds. And that adjusts for demographic shifts and other changes that have caused one or the other of the trust funds, either the Old Age and Survivors Trust Fund or the Disability Insurance Trust Fund, to need a little bit of extra money to continue to pay all scheduled benefits. So we're facing a situation that we've seen almost a dozen times before, and which is basically just a routine action is needed. And unfortunately, what's happened is it's become politicized. As you said in your framing, it's become this political football, just like the government shutdown or the debt ceiling, anything else that we've seen in terms of regular congressional business that's become politicized so that you end up with kind of more myths out there than facts and gridlock instead of routine congressional business. I think the other thing that's worth pointing out, because it gets mixed up in all of these kind of myths and misunderstandings about why we're facing the situation coming up to 2016 that we are. People, I think, have a lot of misunderstandings about trends in the program and why we've seen growth in the number of people who are receiving Social Security disability insurance beneficiaries over the years. And the fact of the matter is, and you can ask the chief actuary of the Social Security Administration, because this is something he's spent a lot of time thinking and talking about in the last couple of years, is explaining why the program has grown. The fact is that the growth is almost entirely explained by the fact that the baby boomers have aged into their high disability years, which is their 50s and 60s, and women entered the labor force in significantly greater numbers in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And so now they've reached parity with men in terms of labor force participation. And through that, coverage by Social Security in case they become disabled before they reach retirement age. Third factor is population growth. So when you combine those three, you explain the growth that we've seen. And so not only is this not a surprise, but it's just something that we expected and that the actuaries knew was going to happen going back to the 90s. And that's where we find ourselves now. But I think, unfortunately, as the old Mark Twain quote goes, the fiction can fly half the way around the world, while the truth is still at home tying its shoes.
Well, exactly right. And the fact is also, I think there's a terrible irony in the fact that the right is insisting on pushing policies that would keep people in the workforce until an even later age, raising the Social Security and Medicare ages even higher. Social Security's retirement age is going up, which makes people even more likely to be disabled on the job at the same time that they're trying to clamp down even more on these stingy and difficult to get disability benefits. So thanks so much for shining some much needed light on this issue, Rebecca Vallas from the Center for American Progress, and thanks so much for joining us.
Really appreciate the time, and thanks for having me on.
You bet. I'm Richard R.J. Eskow, and we will be right back after this. This is the Zero Hour. And we are back on the Zero Hour. I'm Richard R.J. Eskow, and with us now is a good friend of mine, great guy, a fellow at the Campaign for America's Future. We both have fellowships there, which is how I first met him, and he is the editor of the Education Opportunity Network, or EON, website. He was also one of the principal writers for Open Left, if you remember that great website. He owns a marketing and communications consultancy in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He knows a lot about education, and it's good to have you back. Jeff Bryant, thanks for joining us. Jeff, are you with us? Okay, I understand that Jeff is not with us, so he got cut off, but that happens. This is the wonder of radio. We're going to talk about a recent piece Jeff wrote that addresses the intersection of two issues that are close to our heart here at the Zero Hour, and that's education and social policy and the technology moguls who rule our world. And to paraphrase Sam and Dave, it's their world. We're just living in it. How are we doing on getting Jeff back? Dude, pick up the phone. Okay. What else can I tell you? Okay, now we're going to talk about Jeff. Okay. Jeff, you're lucky you got back on, because I was just about to tell out-of-school stories about you to fill time.
Well, you'd have to make up some pretty wild stuff in order for that to be interesting.
I have a good imagination. So
I'm sure you do.
So great to have you. Thanks for joining us. And listen, I was very interested in your latest piece, which mentioned that, Salon's headline said that education has a shocking new enemy. They know how to write the headlines over there. But I guess one of the things that interested me, that could have been any number of people that you've written about recently, including the education secretary. But I'm interested in the role you've been uncovering that Bill Gates has played in education policy, which you really described as kind of transformative. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, actually, there was a recent article in the Washington Post written by their education journalist named Lindsay Layton that laid out the effect that the Gates Foundation has had on education policy, and really an extraordinarily clear narrative. And the millions of dollars that Gates money has poured into the education arena has conditioned a lot of organizations' attitudes and opinions about policy. For instance, beginning back in 2000, the Gates Foundation, over a 6-year period, poured $2 billion into this idea of small schools. The idea was to break up schools that were troubled, large high schools in particular, break them up into smaller schools. Now, the idea was invented by Gates. There's no research that says that small schools necessarily work better than larger comprehensive high schools. And there's been a lot of sort of speculation about where Gates got the idea. But the most important thing to understand is that it was essentially a made-up agenda. Nevertheless, over 2,600 of these small schools rolled out across America, particularly in urban communities, including New York City. And the reason they rolled out was because as money has been gradually taken away from the public sector, policymakers in education, whether you work for a think tank or whether you work in a district office, more and more so treat these philanthropists like a royalty almost, because you know that lots of times what they're donating really constitutes your salary.
Right.
And so you start to accept these ideas that these philanthropists like the Gates Foundation push across, even though, as I said, with the idea of small schools, there's no basis for it. After about 6 to 8 years of these small schools rolling out, there was a strong political backlash in many of the communities where it was happening. Parents, for instance, were very upset at the fact that their schools were broken up to such smaller entities that they couldn't, field athletic teams anymore, or have a school band, or have a big drama department.
Right. Sure.
Students also were alienated from the fact that they got separated into a different school from their classmates.
Sure.
So there was all sorts of backlash to this. And in the meantime, there was no immediate increase in test scores, which has become a proxy for determining learning output, a student performance measure. And so the Gates Foundation, and principally Bill Gates himself, got very frustrated and impatient with the whole idea and promptly ended it in 2008 and moved on to the next endeavor. In the meantime, some of these schools actually continued on as small schools, and there's been some research to show that there were particular students in certain communities that actually benefited. In longer-term longitudinal studies, researchers were able to ascertain that, well, there was something to this for some of these students. But in the meantime, the Gates Foundation moved on to the next idea, which was called turnaround schools. And again, hundreds of $1 million poured into the idea that if we take over a school that has low-performing students and close it, fire all the staff, reopen it in a turnaround endeavor, which usually means hiring a private management company to come in and run the school, then that will produce great results. Here again, there's no research basis on this at all, but because the Gates Foundation poured many millions of dollars into it, policy analysts and think tanks, administrators in school districts went along with the idea. And
I'm getting this mental image of like an imperial ruler snapping his fingers and the courtiers and the various think tanks and research organizations jumping. And, the small school thing, I mean, I think there's pretty solid research that says small classes are a benefit to students, but smaller schools, it sounds like what you're saying is benefits a few or some maybe, but there was no research, no output. Turnaround schools, fixing a troubled school is often a community issue, not just a school issue. It's not like building a monopolistic mega corporation in the technology field, for example. It requires a different skill set, including the ability to negotiate and interact with the community with which you live and to understand and collaborate with that community. So I guess in the minute we have left, it's a fascinating story, and it touches on so many things. Now I gather that Bill Gates is moving on yet again and focusing on Common Core, which is the idea that students are all outputs of a system that should be measured simultaneously with the same test scores and the same predetermined information packets. Is that in the 30 seconds we got left? Is that where we're going with this?
Yes. Gates Foundation, after the turnaround efforts in Chicago did not work well, went on to the Common Core. And now we are seeing all sorts of negative consequences of that. Gates poured millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars into that effort. And we're seeing severe pushback in many places around the country. I'm at the American Federation of Teachers conference today, where they are going to announce that as far as they're concerned, if we're going to go forward with this, it's going to take substantial changes, and they want teachers to have some control of it.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, but I'm picturing Bill Gates as that kid in the Twilight Zone episode who sent everybody to the cornfield. So good luck. Keep up the great work, Jeff Bryant, and we will be back after this break. I'm Richard R.J. Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.
This is The Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, produced by the WEAC Radio Network in Washington, D.C., and broadcast across the nation. Visit us online at thisisthezerohour.com or at youtube.com/thezerohour. Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Eskow.
Welcome back, everybody. And in this segment, we're going to do something special. We're going to have a 0 hour special exclusively on the John Boehner lawsuit against the President of the United States. You know, this story is getting a lot of coverage, but it's trivializing coverage. It really doesn't get to it shows how cheapened our politics has become and how cheapened the perceptions have become, often with good reason, because there was time when a lawsuit between the Speaker of the House of the United States and the President of the United States would be seen as a constitutional crisis. Now it's seen as a comical clown act. And by the way, both can be true. Those two statements are not mutually exclusive. So I do want to give a little attention and a little thought to the John Boehner lawsuit, and we have some unconventional thoughts about it, particularly for people who describe themselves as progressive or liberal. So we may offend everybody along the way, but we really do want to cover this story. So let's hear what John Boehner had to say this week about his lawsuit against President Obama.
The Constitution makes it clear that the president's job is to faithfully execute the laws. And in my view, the president has not faithfully executed the laws. We have a system of government outlined in our Constitution with the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. Congress has its job to do, and so does the president. And when there's conflicts like this between the legislative branch and the administrative branch, it's, in my view, our responsibility to stand up for this institution in which we serve.
Could this lead to an impeachment proceeding against the president?
This is not about impeachment. This is about his faithfully executing the laws of our country.
Wow. So first of all, just on delivery alone, there's laid back, and then there's like this guy's been listening to records by the Cowboy Junkies for about a week. He's just so slow in his delivery. I don't know what that's all about, and I hesitate to speculate. But look, Speaker of the House John Boehner is suing the President of the United States for executive overreach. A lot of people have said it's a partisan stunt, and it is. But that leaves the question, is it wrong? The short answer is, look, context is everything. Context is everything. We do have a real problem in this country with executive overreach. And when a Republican is president, Democrats are always talking about the imperial presidency. You hear that phrase, you've been hearing it since Nixon's presidency, the imperial presidency. And when a Democrat is president, a lot of those Democrats are a lot less troubled about the idea of an imperial presidency. I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. It may upset some people who are usually allies of ours, but let's not duck from the truth. Let's not sacrifice an important constitutional debate on the altar of political partisanship. That's the way I feel about it. So does that mean I think that John Boehner is right? The short answer to that is absolutely not. He's a hypocrite and he's a fraud. George W. Bush's presidency was fraught with examples of executive overreach, far worse than this, and Boehner didn't have a thing to say about it. And when Boehner cooked up this little lawsuit, he didn't even know what he was going to sue about. Remember that? As Paul Begala pointed out on CNN, when reporters asked Boehner which actions he was going to object to in his lawsuit, he said, and I quote, "When I make that decision, I'll let you know." He didn't even know what the overreach was. He just knew he wanted to sue about it. But I got to say this, the specific action that John Boehner finally picked to sue about isn't necessarily as off base as some Democrats are saying. Remember, Boehner said in that clip you heard, the president changed the health care law without a vote of Congress, effectively creating his own law by literally waiving the employer mandate. This is what Boehner said, so that people don't have to comply with it. Quote, "That's not the way our system of government was designed to work. No president should have the power to make laws on his or her own." Well, leaving aside who John Boehner is and who Barack Obama is, I would say to my fellow liberals, isn't that last statement, no president should be allowed to make laws on his or her own, isn't that a reasonable statement? It's not a bad point. And let's talk about the Affordable Care Act. When it was passed, we were all told there was a careful balance in it between individual obligations and employer obligations. The mantra we kept hearing was shared responsibility, shared responsibility. Although I had my doubts about it at the time, that was the pitch. It was a principle of the law, a basic principle. So how come the president gets to decide that at least for a while, the responsibility won't be shared, that individuals have to do their part, but businesses don't? I hate to say it, but in that sense, Boehner's making kind of a fair point, isn't he? And I will also say it's another reason why we need single-payer health care, but that's another conversation altogether. Problem is not that there isn't a fair discussion to be had about this. The problem is that Boehner isn't the guy who should make it. A real lawsuit to determine balance of powers filed on behalf of a legitimately chosen legislature is something this country needs. But Boehner's lawsuit is a joke from a clown who represents an unrepresentative circus. I got to tell you, I think there's enough hypocrisy to go around on this issue. Balance of power constitutional conversations are a lot easier to have, and we should have them, but they're a lot easier to have when the political system hasn't been as deeply corrupted by money as ours has. Sure, power should be balanced among the three branches of government, but a corrupt majority on the Supreme Court rules the judicial branch on behalf of its corporate paymasters. The legislative branch, that's Boehner's, is a jury-rigged, gerrymandered joke. Democrats won 1 million more votes for House seats, but Republicans hold a decisive majority. The Senate's even worse, and as far as the presidency is concerned, all of our recent presidents, Republican or Democratic, have kowtowed to Wall Street in one way or another to get elected. Like we said at the beginning, context is everything. So hold the lawsuits, dial down the hypocrisy, and fight to get our democracy back instead. That's my position on this. We'll have more on the Boehner lawsuit when we come back. I'm Richard R.J. Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour. And we are back on The Zero Hour. All right now, having thoroughly alienated my Democratic friends with my opening remarks about how I think John Boehner actually has kind of a point in his lawsuit, even though his particular lawsuit coming from him is ridiculous and frivolous. But having now alienated my Democratic Party friends, I now offer these additional thoughts on the lawsuit. Maybe it'll help. Okay. Look, Boehner's suing the president of the United States in part for executive overreach, but in this case, probably because the president's finally trying to do his job in the face of all these years of obstruction from a do-nothing Congress. So look at it this way. If Boehner can sue Obama for doing his job, why can't somebody sue Boehner for not doing his? My recommendation, time to sue John Boehner. Look at it this way. There are generally accepted standards for the Speaker of any legislature. According to political science, the Speaker of the House is the presiding, or the Speaker of any House is the presiding officer of the body he or she leads. That's what we're told. Typically, the Speaker's main job is, in the case of the Speaker of the House, is to fantasize about different scenarios where both the president and the vice president are unable to govern, because then he's third in line to the succession. He gets to be president. But when he's done doing that for the day, the Speaker's official duties, as generally understood, include, and I'm quoting from political scientists here, preside over the daily sessions of his body, which Boehner seems to do, preserve order in the chamber. Well, he flunks that one. I mean, remember you lie, remember all of that. Declare parliamentary motions. I don't know if he does that. Rule on parliamentary questions. I've never seen Boehner do that, but maybe he does it. Appoint committee chairs and members. Yes, he does after consultation with the appropriate lobbyists. Refer bills to committee. And here's the key part. Sign legislation, writs, and warrants as needed. Well, okay, this is where Boehner has completely failed to do his job. Where's the legislation? Where's the writs and warrants and all that stuff? His last Congress, Boehner's last Congress, was the 112th. It was, by objective, measurable standards, the least effective Congress in American history. It failed to avert the fiscal cliff disaster and only passed 219 bills. The previous session passed 383 bills. The one before it passed 460 bills. And the session that Harry Truman called the Do-Nothing Congress passed 906 bills. Now, after only passing 219 last time around, the 113th Congress, the current one that Boehner runs, is on track to do even less, according to the most recent reports. And how's Boehner doing as official spokesperson for his body? This is the least popular Congress since they began tracking such things. So Democrats, when it comes to Boehner's lawsuit, don't get mad. I say get even. Sue him. I got to tell you, it would probably be a frivolous, empty lawsuit. And it would probably get shot down by the frivolous, empty suits on the Supreme Court. But at least you'd be making your point clear to the American people. The American people are entitled to a Congress and a speaker that does its job just like the rest of us have to do ours. With John Boehner and his Republican majority, we're not getting that for our money. So, to paraphrase the man, sue me? No. Sue you. Sue me? No. Sue you. And that's our coverage of the John Boehner fiasco that is his lawsuit. Some good discussion to be had about the balance of power, not from this guy. Now, let's pivot to what we call RJ's Random News, the random news of the week that has caught our attention and should catch yours. As long as we're riffing on Republican absurdity, check this out. This is from our friend Brad Friedman and his Brad blog, but this is a real news story. A Kentucky state senator has made the claim that global warming isn't real because Mars temperatures are exactly the same as Earth, and Mars is warming too. What's this guy's name? Okay, the state of Kentucky's Interim Joint Committee on Natural Resources and Environment held a hearing to discuss the new proposed EPA ruling. And this guy, whose name is not jumping out at me, said, Brandon Smith said to a environmental official, you sit there in your chair with your data. We sit up here with our data and our constituents and stuff behind us. I love how the environmental guy has data. Brandon Smith, Republican from Kentucky, has data and our constituents and stuff behind it. Constituents and stuff. I think that's a boutique. Okay, I don't want to get into the debate, says Brandon Smith, about climate change, but I will simply point out that I think in academia, we all agree that the temperature on Mars is exactly as it is here. Really? I think there's some dispute about that, but let's go on. Nobody will dispute it. Oh, okay. Brandon disagrees with me. Yet there are no coal mines on Mars. There are no factories on Mars that I'm aware of. Now, there's a judicious man. He doesn't want to state anything he doesn't know for certain. Okay. Little wonder he doesn't want to get into the debate on climate change. As Brad Friedman says, okay, the average temperature on Earth is 57 degrees Fahrenheit, while on Mars, the average temperature is minus 81 degrees Fahrenheit. And is it getting warmer on Mars? God only knows, but no, it's not getting warmer on Mars. It's getting warmer here because we're changing climate. So what do you do with something like that? Republicans are from Mars. Human beings are from planet Earth, where it is getting warmer. Now, something else. FCC data shows that 9 out of 10 wireless 911 calls in Washington, D.C. lack accurate caller location information. What does this mean and why does it matter? You know, here on the Zero Hour, we're always talking about how uncomfortable we are with the way that Big Brother can track us using the new technology. But one of the benefits of the new technology is that you're supposed to be able to make calls from your cell phone. If you're unable to speak and you just dial 911, it's supposed to be able to geo-track you with appropriate safeguards and everything in order to find you, locate you, get the emergency people out to help you. Now, the problem is that the nation's capital, which is overwhelmingly lower income, overwhelmingly minority, faces unique security issues, and it's critical, as I say, it's critical that 911 callers in DC be quickly located, but we can't. Why? Why is this system somehow leaving out the lowest income among us? That is a mystery that has yet to be properly answered. Business Insider did a piece, 15 facts about Dubai that will blow your mind. Okay, they didn't all blow my mind, but I'll tell you some of them did. 1 out of every 4 cranes on Earth is located in Dubai. They're growing so quickly. I think that, by the way, a lot of Americans bought homes there. I think they're thinking it's a place they can go hide when the economy collapses altogether here. Then they talk about all the gold they were using. Here's one I love. Dubai's police force spends more on each of their supercars than it costs to send a kid to college. Dubai's police force uses supercars in order to impress tourists and to show how classy the city is, says Business Insider. So they use cars like the Ferrari FF, which costs $500,000, the Lamborghini Aventador, which costs $397,000, and one Aston Martin 177, which costs $1.79 million. Approximately 85% of the population is foreign, and as they are kind enough to point out in Business Insurance, many foreign workers are living in hideously substandard housing. The Business Insider doesn't say it, but it's barely better than slavery, and something needs to be done about it, certainly before we allow any international games like the World Cup to go to Dubai. $300 robots in Dubai are replacing illegal child labor in camel racing. It's an industry that is expected to be worth, or estimated to be worth, hundreds of millions of dollars because children are small enough to be camel jockeys. The sport led to a boom in child trafficking from impoverished communities in South Asia and Africa. But now you can buy robots for $300 to $10,000 to curtail the problem of child trafficking. And what can I say about that? The Burj Khalifa, which is the tallest building in I believe the world, but certainly in Dubai, is so tall that some of its residents need to wait longer to break their fasts during Ramadan. Those who live on the 150th floor and higher live so high up that they see the sun longer than other inhabitants of the country, so they can't break their fast at the same time, says the Guardian, which I suppose is one mild additional sacrifice they need to make because Islam, like Christianity and other religions, says it's very difficult for a rich man who hoards his wealth to get into heaven. So maybe fasting a little longer will help them out with that. So, okay, was there anything more interesting? 39% of the famous Burj Al Arab hotel is uninhabitable. 39%, 40%, and completely wasted space. Wow, these people have a lot of money. And the royal suite of Burj Al Arab costs approximately $20,000 per night. Okay, that is some of our mind-blowing facts about Dubai. Now, a little closer to home, Germany just kicked out the CIA chief in Berlin. Don't know if you saw that, but they're really mad. This time the Germans are mad because we spied on them, then we said we were sorry, and then we spied on them. So that's kind of interesting. NSA statement on Glenn Greenwald's report. I don't know if you saw Glenn Greenwald's report. I hope you did. That we were spying not just randomly, but on selected people in this country, especially prominent Muslim American leaders, including at least one or two who seem to have done nothing except fight for the civil rights of Muslims in the United States. So the United States put out a statement. It says it is entirely false that U.S. intelligence agencies conduct electronic surveillance of political, religious, or activist figures. It's very interesting because it's a long statement, but they actually don't deny that they spied on these folks specifically. So Washington, D.C., a place where they can spy on you for your political beliefs, or just because you happen to download the Tor browser or all the other reasons the NSA has spied on people, but yet they can't find you when you get hurt in an emergency and dial 911. And that's the state of the technological dystopia we live in today. That's why we have the 0 Hour. That's why we have this program to tell you about these things. We'll be back after this. I'm Richard R.J. Eskow, and this is the 0 Hour. Okay, with us again is a friend of the programs. At least I hope he feels he's a friend of the program. Cole Stangler is a great writer. He is also, he's written for a lot of great publications. I believe now he's staff writer for In These Times, but he's written for The Nation, Salon, The American Prospect, all sorts of publications you probably know and love. And he's here to talk to us about some of the interesting developments in a couple different fronts, including the first one I want to talk about. Well, first of all, Cole, thanks for coming on the program.
Great to be back.
Yeah, it's always good to have you. And listen, you've been tracking this story in South Portland, where where they're proposing an ordinance to keep tar sands oil from entering the city, which is more significant than it might initially sound when you hear that sentence. So it's an interesting story. So first of all, what are tar sands?
So tar sands refers to these giant deposits in Alberta, Canada. The most famous example, and it's this oil that has particularly damaging environmental effects. So a carbon footprint to produce a barrel of oil when you get this oil out of these tar sands in Canada from Alberta, one barrel of that oil, it has 5 times the carbon footprint as a standard, quote unquote, standard barrel of crude. So let's say you're getting that from North Dakota, where you're drilling into the ground, you're taking out the oil. The whole process of getting this really heavy, thick oil from Canada and refining it has a lot more emissions, and the carbon footprint is a lot greater. Not to mention just the local impact there going on in Canada right now, where First Nations whose land being affected. There's elevated rates of cancer. Those are the local effects. But even putting aside the local effects, just the global impact of these tar sands is really devastating. And so
we've got.
Go ahead.
So we've got this stuff that's kind of toxic in the sense that, first of all, it's literally toxic to the local people where it's being pulled out. The First Nations or Native peoples are suffering disproportionately. Then it has huge environmental impact because you have to do so much more refining to it. And so there are a lot of reasons, particularly at this stage in our planet's evolution, to object to it. And so South Portland's got a ordinance. And what does the ordinance say exactly?
Right, yeah, and just to emphasize it, before also that, the famous game over for the planet line, the NASA scientist James Hansen, it refers to the tar sands. So if you develop the tar sands, it's game over for the planet. So the Keystone XL is one example of that. And right now, basically, in recent years, in the last decade or so, industry has been trying to extract and somehow figure out a way to get this oil to market. And right now, it's basically locked in Canada, and there's some of it's being exported to the United States, but basically they want to access new markets. And to do that, you have to get to your Pacific coast or the Atlantic coast. Or you can go all the way through to the Gulf Coast, which is what the Keystone XL would do. So you have a variety of different pipeline proposals, none of which are actually, I think there's one minor pipeline, the Keystone XL, or the Keystone pipeline right now is functioning, but the major pipeline proposals to get this stuff to market to the coast haven't gone through. And so what activists in Maine started being concerned about, I think about 5 years ago, oil industry started talking about potentially using this pipeline that was put in place back in World War II, actually, to ship oil from Portland, Maine, up to Canada. And what people started looking into is they realized the oil industry was talking about potentially reversing the flow of this old World War II pipeline that was supposed to carry regular crude oil, imported crude oil, reversing that to make it a tar sands pipeline that would then be able to, collect tar sands from refineries in Montreal and ship it down to Maine where you could export it. So in other words, this was seen, and this is seen, depending on who you talk to, as a major path right now for tar sands exports. So in the same way that the Keystone XL is, in the same way that the Northern Gateway pipeline in British Columbia is, that First Nations activists are very strongly opposing. And so basically, this is one of the, as an activist I was talking to the other day told me, this is one of the very important lines of defense right now to stop tar sands from being exported, but also from making tar sands less economically viable, because you can only produce so much of this if you're able to get it to market and sell it for good prices. If basically there are barriers to getting it to market that are set up other than, the United States through this one pipeline that's working right now, then it becomes less profitable. So it's an interesting story because on the one hand, it's an incredibly local issue. It's a kind of almost boring, NIMBY-ish land use issue. But at the same time, it has really global, I would argue, global implications.
Right. I mean, I think that is what's part of what's fascinating about it is because, I'm looking at this thing from about South Portland, Maine, a little town, and the city council is voting, at least initially, against this thing. They meet in the South Portland Community Center gym, which I can't imagine is like a major world deliberative body. Nearly 500 citizens, energy company workers, and others show up. So it's a town meeting, basically. It's one town having a town meeting, but this town happens to be at, almost like military, at a strategic key point in the distribution of this planet killing product. So what happens in this little town could affect, it could influence at any rate, the planet's environment going forward. Am I overstating?
No, I would say that's accurate. The other thing about this too is that it's taken them a while to get this far. Actually, you have to go all the way back to last summer when activists started talking about this, or trying to get something passed. And there actually was an election. There was a ballot question in last November on the ballot whether or not to prevent, to change the zoning regulations to prevent basically all further oil infrastructure related development on the port. And so they thought they had majority support. And the oil industry mounted a ferocious campaign. I think they spent over $750,000, about $750,000 on this. And think about this. This is a town of around 25,000 people, where you're having groups like American Petroleum Institute come in. And in total, the industry spending $750,000 on this. And eventually, when the vote went down last November, the no votes against the ordinance won just by, I think, a couple hundred votes. So right down the wire. And activists regrouped, and they decided that, in order to get this passed, the best way to do it would be to make it more narrowly focused. Because last time when this vote failed, the argument from the oil industry was not about tar sands. It was about, if we pass this ordinance that's really broad, it's going to have unintended consequences. It's going to prevent economic development and those kinds of arguments without actually talking about tar sands. So this time activists said, okay, let's not have it ban all infrastructure development on the port. Let's have it so it just prevents the loading of oil onto ships on the port and related infrastructure, specifically to loading barrels of oil onto tankers in the port instead of.
So they rephrased it so that it wasn't so broad that to address that unintended consequences argument, and it's now very specific, is what you're saying.
Correct. And that apparently was enough to convince City Council. And so now the City Council passed it on their first reading of the bill by a 6-1 vote, so pretty clear margin there. And now it goes to a separate committee, a planning committee, then it comes back to City Council, and the final vote is expected for, I think, the 21st, if I'm not mistaken.
Now, I can't believe they're just going to go away. So with so much money at stake, I've got to believe that the oil industry is looking at this and strategizing, just as activists have strategized, and saying, how can we flip this and get the city council to pass? I mean, do we have to give every resident of South Portland $500,000, or what do we do? But I've got to think they're considering every possibility, and there's going to be a counter move. Do we know anything about what that might be?
I've been talking to activists and people. Everyone kind of doesn't want to speculate, but people suspect. There's got to be probably something up their sleeves. Who knows what it'll be? It's funny, actually. This vote took place Wednesday night. And you mentioned 500 people were there. So the original vote was actually supposed to take place on Monday night. And so everyone shows up to this vote on Monday night, and the supporters are there in their light blue T-shirts. It's sort of the group Protect South Portland has been wearing these T-shirts to promote their cause. So they're all there as expected. And then unexpectedly, there are about 100 folks, still less than the supporters, but 100 folks show up in red T-shirts, and these are the anti-ordinance contingent here in all red. And there were too many people that had gathered, and so they had to postpone the original meeting. And so, this is Monday to Wednesday night, but still activists at the time, when that happened, were accusing the oil industry of delay tactics. So that's a small thing, but you could imagine something, more serious, more significant coming up soon. Who knows what it'll be? It's hard to speculate.
Sounds like South Portland's going to be interesting to watch. Well, listen, you also wrote another piece. We're going to take a quick break, but I hope you'll stick with us when we talk about your piece, which you called Monkey Wrenching the Frackers, because I think it's going to be really interesting as activists move to more, at least a subset of them, move to somewhat more radical tactics. So if you can stick with us, we'll talk with Cole Stangler about his piece on monkey wrenching the frackers after we come back. Frack me, no frack you. So, Cole, if you'll stick with us, we'll be right back after these messages. I'm Richard, RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour. And we are back on the Zero Hour with our friend and compañero reporter Cole Stangler of In These Times. And Cole, this program airs from noon to 3 in Washington, D.C. on Saturday. And I believe Saturday is also the date of the first national rally against the Cove Point project. Is that correct?
Well, it's actually Sunday. So Sunday from, I think, 12 to 3, I think, 12:30 to 3, 3:30 maybe, 12:30 to 3:30 on Sunday is the rally.
Okay, you're going to be there?
I will be there. Unfortunately, they scheduled that right at the beginning of the World Cup final, and I assume the organizer of the rally was not a World Cup fan or a soccer fan, just based on that. But we'll still be able to catch the second part of the game.
Well, if the organizers are listening, my recommendation is large screen TV and coolers. And
that would be nice.
Yeah, seriously, man. I mean,
when they have protests. The French know how to protest. They bring these. If you've ever been to a French trade union rally, they have these little trucks, and they have guys like frying sausages in the trucks, and they have coolers, and they have music on each truck. That's really what American environmentalists could use.
I'd be so down with that. And if you just get a big sheet and project the World Cup on the sheet, man, you'd get people down there. So let's the organizers. I would drop a word with them. I would say that's the way to roll. But listen, hey, yeah, all right, please. And totally random question: did you ever watch Battlestar Galactica, the new one?
No, I don't watch Battlestar. I know I have many friends who do, but I myself.
Well, it's awesome, and it's totally. We watched it. It was totally like the Portlandia satire. You start watching it, you can't stop it. You basically starve to death until you're done.
Yeah.
But they have this word that sounds like fracking. That's what they say instead of the F word. They're always, what's the frick? And I forget what it is. But I always think of Battlestar Galactica when we talk about fracking.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you wrote this piece. That was just me being random in the purpose.
No, I mean the title of the piece, "Monkey Wrenching the Frackers," is almost fairly English. I mean, 25 years ago, that would have made 30 years ago, 35 years ago, that would have made no sense to anybody.
Right. Obviously, monkey wrenching comes from Edward Abbey, the great environmentalist, writer, pioneer, kind of radical troublemaker, cool guy who used to talk about monkey wrenching, meaning to throw a monkey wrench in the mechanisms, the machinery that's creating pollution. And the frackers, as we now know, are fracking. So it was a great piece. It was really fun to read. I was really disappointed, though, because you have the, all right, MFs, this is an unlawful assembly is your first line. I was so disappointed it wasn't real cops. But they were. Tell us a little bit about that story. What the radical environmentalists have in mind.
Right. So I suppose a brief little introduction is in order of the thing they're protesting. Cove Point, this big natural gas plant that's being proposed in Maryland right now. And to summarize, this has kind of breezed through more or less the federal regulatory process. There's been some delays, but it looks like nothing like Keystone XL, and it looks like it's going to be approved, and so this plant would encourage fracking, and also people have talked about when you export natural gas, you've got a lot of it has a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. Natural gas is famously, it's a lot cleaner than coal, it's cleaner than oil, but you have these methane emissions that come from both fracking the gas and then the fugitive methane emissions from transporting it you have to cool it down to be able to liquefy it, to put it on these ships. You send it across the world, get it to India. You have to regasify it, and this whole process is they've estimated to have more greenhouse gas emissions than coal. So, anyways, that's kind of what this Cove Point project would entail in brief. And so people have been frustrated by the lack of government accountability, and it's the federal regulators' inability to recognize the environmental impact of this proposal. And so there's kind of a growing faction of people who want to take things a step further, who have decided that the conventional protester route really hasn't been all that effective. And that's another debate. There's people on both sides of that, and I think it's a very open debate. But so basically, there was a camp, as often is the case for radical environmentalists who want to engage in direct action, have these little gatherings across the country to kind of meet up and discuss what kind of tactics they want to use, or not even discuss specific tactics, but just get to know each other, talk a little bit about what they're protesting, network, do some preparing various things you want to do. And
and in this case, Cole, one of the things they did was they role played confrontations where I guess they were doing civil disobedience, and then they had people playing police who came in and charged them. And I love your description. You said the make-believe cops have been supplied with orange construction vests, plastic badges, and faux police caps, which combined with their many tattoos and piercings to make them look like a punk version of the Village People. I love that image. So what are the confrontations? It's fun to stay at the YMCA. So what are the...
Yeah, they actually sang YMCA throughout the
figures. So what are the what are the confrontations they're planning now? I mean, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so the other thing about this is, they're, for, I think, good reason. I try to get into this a little bit, or for maybe good reasons, putting it a little too, anyways, for reasons that they take seriously and that people can take seriously. They're really adamant about not sharing too many details, but basically, these were generic kind of confrontations that they were just role playing. And the idea of this was, there was a facilitator who was trying to make sure that people were, thinking on the fly in these various scenarios. And so the scenario I describe is, there's people who are getting ready to do an action. They're in the park hanging out beforehand. Within a couple minutes of getting ready to do whatever direct action it is, maybe chain themselves to something. Let's say it's at Dominion, which is an energy company that wants to do Cove Point. And then the scenario that they're not looking for is where you have a bunch of cops that run up and try to do some arrests. And so the whole idea is, how do you think on the fly in these kinds of situations?
So if they we've only got about a minute left, Cole, but if they were to do something more dramatic, which, by the way, I can't, I got to make up my mind how I think about that, but I'm not instantly against it. If they were to do something more dramatic, like in the 20 seconds we got left, when do you think that might be?
It's hard to say. The whole way this stuff works is the autonomous direct action is people don't share details of what they're planning with other people. I do know, I would say be on the lookout for next week. There's a big march coming up on Sunday, and be on the lookout for some direct action. Heard through the grapevine, so be on the lookout for something.
All right. Well, I know you'll keep covering it for us. I hope you come back and talk to us about it. Cole Stangler of In These Times, thanks for all the great work. Thanks for joining us. The first rule of direct action is you do not talk about direct action. Thanks for being with us, and we will be back after. You bet. And we will be back after this. I'm Richard R.J. Eskow, and this is the 0 Hour. It's fun to stay at the Y.
This is the 0 Hour with RJ Eskow, produced by the WEAC Radio Network in Washington, D.C., and broadcast across the nation. Visit us online at thisisthezerohour.com or at youtube.com/thezerohour. Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Eskow.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Zero Hour. I'm Richard R.J. Eskow, and we've got a technology hour coming up for you with Mark Weinstein from the group Scruples on private social networking, and we have Mark Ames, our good pal Mark Ames from Pando Daily. We're going to talk a little bit about his reporting on the ongoing scandal of wage fixing in the Silicon Valley. We're also going to talk about a piece I wrote that got a lot of attention this week, much of it negative, much of it positive. It was given the headline, "Let's Nationalize Amazon and Google," which is not exactly what I said, and I'll get back to that. But first, I think it's funny when people say that I hate technology. I love technology, actually. I'm a technology nut. I have gadgets everywhere. I worked in the technology field for a while, specifically related to healthcare, but I was actually a pioneer in some of the stuff they do now, or part of pioneering efforts is a better, more humble, and more accurate way of putting it. So, no, I love technology. I hate the abuse of technology. I hate the monopolistic arrogance and abuse of it. I hate the big data invasion of privacy. I guess I feel strongly about it, perhaps because with my own background, I understand it. And I understand, for example, how lousy the technological aspect of some of our billion-dollar corporations is, how unimpressive, for example, Facebook is as a piece of technology. So, and I understand how much public policy has enabled some of these corporations, but I don't hate technology. As I said earlier, I love the internet for its ability to do things, and phones and pocket technology for the ability to do things like allow me to share with you the secret meeting that Coca-Cola executives held to try to intimidate their workers into not joining unions. I love that. I love some of the initiatives that are underway, including Mark Weinstein's, to protect privacy. So no. I'm not anti-technology, but it's interesting. It was interesting because I actually wrote a piece suggesting that that corporations like Amazon and Google, which have depended so much on public funding to become what they are today, publicly funded technology like the internet and the education that allows them to have users who can read what they put out or the books they sell or whatever. I gave a pretty well-reasoned argument for, as I put it, raising the question, is it time to manage and regulate these companies as public utilities? My buddies at Salon, knowing how to stir up controversy, gave it the headline, "Let's Nationalize Amazon and Google, publicly funded technology built big tech." So what's really funny to me about all this is how many conservatives don't read past the headline. For example, Front Page Magazine, they said Richard Eskow has issued a I won't even go into some of the smear making they do of fellow of the Campaign for America's Future, a project of George Soros. I mean, this is like old, Soros may have given it money years before I joined. But this is the smear tactics of the right. It's time to nationalize liberal websites. You see, you get it, because I said nationalize these corporations. They want it. They said, hey, why not nationalize liberal websites? Well, again, this long, silly rant about any thinking socialist would want to, blah, blah, blah. But he never read the piece, obviously, because I talked about regulating them as public utilities. Now, imagine your Google search is taking only 4 to 8 weeks to complete, or Amazon charging you twice as much for your orders to subsidize free contraceptives for all customers. Let's nationalize the Huffington Post and Salon. Oh, gosh, they're so clever. Something else at Salon.com calls for communist nationalization of tech industry. Of course, it didn't say that at all. Of course, The Conversation, so-called Breitbart.com, Salon, let's nationalize Amazon and Google. Salon is not quite beyond parody, as this excellent parody Twitter account demonstrates. On the other hand, it gets harder every day to distinguish the real site from the jokes. At least this guy read it. I'll give him credit. John Sexton. An article published today proposed that Google and Amazon be turned into public utilities. Okay. Let's nationalize Amazon and Google was the story Forbes, the guy who blogs for Forbes, I don't think he gets paid by them. I don't know how they do that over there. I've heard different stories, but nationalizing Google and Amazon isn't just a bad idea. It's the worst idea. Of course, here's Eskow's argument in a nutshell. He writes, because they spy on us, etc., etc., the American government should nationalize Google and Amazon. Seriously. No, that's not what it said. He didn't read the article either. Okay, his name of this guy who writes without reading is Eric Kain, Kain. Okay, so what did we learn from this? We're going to talk more about the idea. First of all, they were so inept in their arguments that now I'm leaning towards nationalizing them. But secondly, none of this is an anti-technology argument. It's an anti-monopoly. What they're doing in monopolizing is as old-fashioned as the railroad trusts of the 19th century. And what they're doing in spying on us is as old-fashioned as the panopticon, the prison with no privacy and no spaces where you can hide, that was designed by philosopher Jeremy Bentham in the 19th century as well. So these are 19th century corporations using 21st century technology funded as government initiatives. That's why I oppose them, not because I hate technology, but because I hate 19th century monopolies and invasions of privacy. I'm Richard R.J. Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour. And we are back on The Zero Hour. I'm Richard R.J. Eskow, and as I was saying before we went to break, people have sometimes accused me of being anti-tech when I haven't. It was long ago, but I have a tech background. I love this stuff. I've worked in AI projects. I'm into it, but I'm just not into the monopolistic practices. I'm not into the invasions of privacy. But I think it can be used in ways that empower people as well as disempower people. And our next guest has been working in that space for quite some time. Mark Weinstein is CEO and founder of Scruples. That's SGROUPLES, like Scruples and Group, Scruples.com, which is advertised as the world's safest social network. And he blogs on privacy issues for Huffington Post and USA Today, among other places. Has been written up a lot of places, advocate for online privacy. And Mark, thanks so much for joining us.
RJ, it's a pleasure to be here. I can appreciate your background. And, there are definitely monopolies in the world, the Facebook monopoly, the Google monopoly, and the privacy vacuums, the data vacuums, the invasions that they cause.
And incidentally, by the way, before I want to ask you about your approaches to that, both Scruples and just general advice. I know you had 8 tips, but I just installed Ghostery on my browser, which I'm sure which tells you all the trackers that are on every site you go to, and it's 8, it's 14, it's 12, it's 10, it's we're being tracked everywhere we go, right?
We're being tracked everywhere, and what's interesting is people think, for example, just, Facebook, I'm going to use them as an example because the Wall Street Journal recently wrote about this. Elizabeth Dwoskin wrote about this in the Wall Street Journal. And she researched a little bit, and she discovered that Facebook's tracking us at 1,205 of the top 2,510 sites in the United States, the most popular. So they're not just tracking us at Facebook, and when you're at Facebook, as you said, when you just Ghostery is a great feature. It shows you how many tracking cookies there are on you, and it's really fascinating. You're like, oh my God! But of course, it's all about data. These are, Google's a service for us for sure, but technically we're the product. The customer is the advertising.
Right. And that's one of the points I like to make too, is that actually the software is not the product. We're the product. And
right.
Just quick story, and I want to get your thoughts on it. I've seen a lot, as all have, really pay attention, signs of invasion of privacy. Here's the weirdest. Over 20 years ago, I helped design a social insurance system, both the computer system and the policies, for the government of Hungary when they were converting over from communism. I was engaged briefly to a Hungarian woman who had a daughter from a previous marriage. I have not been in touch with her. The woman herself is not even online, as far as I know. I have no idea where she is. The daughter was a child. The other day, LinkedIn recommended the now grown daughter who's living in London as somebody I might know. I have no friends in common with this woman. I haven't been to Hungary in 20 years. How do they do that?
Oh my God, that could be one of the creepiest of the creepiest stories that I've heard about the data vacuum. That's incredible. They have connected. Remember, they are researching everything. They go through everything. Data brokers have 1,500 points of data on over 200 million individual Americans. This is incredible. Now, that's really one of the most amazing stories that I've heard, and I believe it. And this is where we've got to take privacy back. Somehow, somewhere, there's something, some data point that one of these data brokers, these data systems, was able to ascertain. And I can't tell you how. We'd have to figure out where the connection was made, and then through this myriad of sources, LinkedIn makes the connection, and it's incredible. And this has gone too far. This has really gone too far.
Right. What if my wife didn't know my current? Or what if it's just nobody's business? And by the way, one theory, just they both have unusual names, unusually spelled names, and so it's possible that I sent somebody an email, maybe, or made a Facebook comment that I used to know a woman named this who had a daughter named that, and they did mother name, daughter name, whatever. But this girl may say, on Facebook may say her mother. I don't know. But the point is this: we need to protect ourselves, and even I'm a pretty cautious guy. One of your recommendations is don't use your Facebook or Google accounts to link to new apps. I never do. I try to be cautious about that stuff. But even I, who am fairly good about this stuff, get tripped up. So as that story shows. So what are some of your other thoughts? And then I do want to talk a little bit about scruples as well. But what are some of your other thoughts?
For sure, by the way, maybe you mentioned it in a Gmail. Do you have a Gmail account?
I do.
Okay. All right, because remember, Google reads everything. They have every legacy, every chat, every email communication you've ever had with anybody, and they scrape that data. And they all share, by the way. It goes into the big data vacuum. I call this the big data vacuum. And I think we're coming to what I call the end of the Facebook era, where we all thought it was cool to be public, because now it's getting really creepy, because we're seeing, after the ecstasy, we're now dealing with all this laundry. And I had the same experience at Facebook. We all have these exes, right? I had the girlfriend, we all, as we're growing up, the one girlfriend where that was it, and we never wanted to talk or know or see each other again, or certainly I didn't want to. And she finds me on Facebook and sends me a friend invitation. And this was one of the defining moments when I decided to build a new, private communications platform. And I'm one of the founders of social media, by the way. I've done this before and won many awards for it. But I just thought that's too creepy. I'll decide who I want to connect with in my past, not, somebody else, not Facebook, not Google, not LinkedIn.
Right. I when I connected with some high school friends and then found myself saying things like, I can't believe she likes him, I just thought, I got to get off this. But anyway, so tell us about Scruples. Scruples is what? An alternative to Facebook, right?
Well, Scruples is really a brand new kind of communication platform. It's really a global communication network for your real life, for you and your friends and your family and your coworkers, with privacy you trust, with a privacy bill of rights. We're the only company in the world with a privacy bill of rights. So you share, photos, videos, privacy mail, chat rooms, documents, document sharing, the things that we love to share. I love technology. I love social media. But I don't love the privacy violations. So our privacy bill of rights states specifically, you own your content, not us. We don't use facial recognition. We don't spy on your contact list. We make money the old-fashioned way by offering you options and upgrades that will improve your experience, just like it's always been in capitalism. And we give you a great service for free if you don't want to do that. You can store, buy up to 500 gigabytes of storage, store all your photos and documents, whether you're sharing them or not. So Scruples is really, and Darcy Travalos at Forbes magazine has called us the next generation. So we're really evolving the conversation and bringing privacy and respect back to this medium.
Now, I would think the challenge would be, I mean, I love the idea, but I would think the challenge would be first of all, I mean, it's hard to get anybody to compete with Facebook since they got such a massive market share. But I would think that the challenge for you would be, so how do you basically have to get a community of people and market to them in a way, it seems to me, now I'm just thinking out loud, but it seems to me that you've got to say, well, you can't just market RJ Eskow. You got to say, well, RJ and his family and his friends would all be sympathetic with this, and then maybe I'm the node that says to hey, everybody, let's go over here. Is that kind of how the spreading the word is supposed to work?
Well, RJ, first of all, let's keep the World Wide Web in the context of the 25 short years that it's been around. So Facebook's been around for 10 years of the 25 years of the World Wide Web. The founder of the World Wide Web, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the real founder, who's very famous in technology circles, was just interviewed. The 25th anniversary just happened. Tim did an interview with CNET. He only talked about one company when he talked about the future and what's next. He talked about Scruples. You see, the last couple of weeks, people are, once again, just totally pissed off because we've just learned that Facebook is, doing emotional experiments on us with our feed.
Right.
And this, and people didn't really understand this until now, that Facebook has always been manipulating the posts that we see. We don't see every post that our friends put up for us to see. Facebook is deciding their marketing algorithms. It's all about money. It's all about the data vacuum. They're emotional. They've got that, this advanced research team manipulating what we see. People are getting pissed off. This is like a bad relationship with irreconcilable differences, and we haven't found our next partner, but we're looking. And Scruples
and I think
is the next partner.
And I think that whole debate about Facebook, the people who tried to defend it missed the entire point, which is I liken Facebook to a phone company that decides which call you're going to get and in what order. That's not what a phone company is supposed to do.
That's right. That's right. And I don't know if you saw the Princeton study, but this is very interesting because we have short memories as human beings. But, MySpace came and went overnight, and Princeton has just released a study proposing and predicting that Facebook will lose 80% of their members by the end of 2017. And it's a fascinating study, and Facebook spent millions of dollars to destroy the credibility and undermine the credibility of the study, and that should tell us all something. And also, RJ, anecdotally, you probably hear it from your friends already. People are leaving Facebook.
They are. My son just left after the latest study coming out. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But I've got to say also one of my other objections to Facebook is because I know how to design a good user interface, and it's a horrible user interface. But I hope you'll come back and talk to us again, Mark, because I feel like we didn't cover everything we could have. But thanks so much for joining us, Mark Weinstein, CEO and founder of Scruples and privacy writer and advocate. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Richard. Take care, everybody.
You bet. I'm Richard R.J. Eskow. We will be right back after this. This is The Zero Hour. We are back on The Zero Hour. In case you hadn't noticed that it was our We Are Back music, it means we are back. And we are going to talk a little bit more about technology. We're trying to get Mark Ames on the line. Mark is a great writer on this topic. We have a lot to discuss with him. And, you got him? Excellent. We love to hear that. Okay, Mark is a great friend of the show. I like to think he is he's a writer for Pando Daily. He was one of the founders before that of NSFW Corp. He's very well known as the founding editor of the satirical Moscow bi-weekly The Exile, which I was a big fan of. He's author of Going Postal, Rage, Murder, and Rebellion, From Reagan's Workplaces to Clinton's Columbine, and of course now well beyond. And he was a regular contributor to The Nation. He was a guest on MSNBC's Dylan Radigan show. And Mark, if you're anything like me, you haven't been asked on MSNBC in a long time, but maybe that's just me. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. Yeah, God, that list makes me feel pretty old at this point, but
Oh man, don't even get me started. You don't know about being old, man. So listen, I mean, we're going to talk about a couple things. So it's great to have you, including, I know you were interested in talking about my now infamous nationalized Google piece, which, by the way, I didn't write that, but I'm warming up to the idea. But I want to talk about a couple things you wrote, starting with, and this was such a big deal to me. The Google, your headline was Google wants us to forget about its near total monopoly over what we know, and this has to do with the EU saying that people ought to have a right to object to information that's on a Google. In fact, I think I used this case in my piece, but tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, so in the EU has a somewhat stronger, it seems to be, privacy laws and antitrust. And granted, the bar is incredibly low if you're comparing it to America, but particularly on antitrust. But they do seem to be stronger on that. And there was a ruling from the EU, I don't know, about a month or so ago, that people who want to be, forgotten, essentially, so that some link to an article about them, perhaps it's defamatory or something like that, that they could have it removed, because essentially, well, see, people didn't pull back the camera enough on this, because if there's a link and it says something about you and it's high up on, it's on certainly on the first page or two, which would be like, front page in a newspaper or front shelf in a store, that's what people are going to know about you. And Google makes money off that, and individuals want to have the right to privacy, to not have, to be able to say what people might know or not know about them. And of course, the other side of the argument is, well, what about the right to information and freedom of press and, and so on. So that's sort of how the debate has been confined to, thus far, which is privacy versus freedom of speech. And my point was, that's true, but my point is, there's never been any monopoly on information and on what we know that comes anywhere close to Google. And that's really what we should be talking about. When we want to know something, we Google it, and whatever appears on the first page is true, and it's what we know. True in the sense of this is what we believe to be true, and believe what we know and what we should know. It's as if, the BBC, CNN, New York Times, Itar Tass, Komsomolska Pravda. There's never been anything like this with this much power that crosses borders and minds and platforms.
Right. Google. So if the right outlet writes that, Richard Eskow mates with goats, and it gets picked up and it's the top search item, and it happens to not be true because I don't roll that way, literally, most human beings on Earth are in the situation where if they happen to Google my name anywhere on the planet, that's what they're going to see. So it's not like the old days when a newspaper might run its story in a town that says local writer mates with goats, and then I can complain, I can file a suit, I can. Yeah. There's nothing. Your point is a great one. There's nothing like it.
Yeah, and I think that's sometimes I think Barry Lynn made this point. His name in that book Corner, that book about monopolies, that at a certain point, the tight focus of the debate about the power of Google and the power of the internet, focusing overly tightly on privacy issues, really masks the politics of internet monopolies and the power that internet monopolies have over us, which is just absolutely unlike anything we've ever seen. And so I feel like at some point, we got to pull the camera back and talk about the power that they have over us and over what we know and over our minds and over knowledge.
And let me give you another example, because it strikes me. Okay, Google owns YouTube. This program is right. It depends to a certain extent, lesser extent, but it depends on its Google channel. its YouTube channel to keep viewers, if they want a visual feed along with it, to watch. There are times when I've wanted to use, I play music, I write about music, comment about music, downloading, also music as culture. If I want to play a Lana Del Rey song, Ultraviolence, or something to talk about what it says culturally, I run the risk of running afoul, not of copyright law, because it's fair use, but of Google rules and regulations. And Google can arbitrarily lower the ranking of my channel or block it altogether. And I have no legal recourse. Google is acting with 80, 90% of video views coming through YouTube. Google has the right to destroy my YouTube channel as a business enterprise, and I would have no recourse, even if I didn't do anything wrong, even if it was fair use, even if Lana Del Rey agreed before the fact to let me do it. If Google's algorithms decide I violated the rules, they can shut my business down.
Well, they can also, that power is just incredible. But they could also do that for business reasons, right? I mean, they could just decide that maybe they're funding some startup, radio startup or YouTube startup that for some reason you're taking viewers from or business from, and that it makes just bottom line sense for them to push you down or block some of your shows or whatever and promote something that is more in their business interests. And that's frightening. I mean, this is why I kind of keep going back to the railroads and the octopus. I mean, what did the railroads do? They had the power to discriminate like that. All of a sudden, the railroads appeared, and so you didn't bring your farm goods, or your grain, or whatever to market on horse and buggy anymore. You brought it by train. But then the railroads could decide who they were going to favor and who they weren't, and they could invest in their own farms and destroy other farms by making their time to market much slower or much more expensive.
I just realized, Mark, that when you use the term tectopus, which you like to do to talk about the Silicon Valley tectopus, you're referencing the old, was it Frank Norris book, The
Frank
Octopus?
Norris. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Frank Norris. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And the old populists.
Yeah, so you're right on. I mean, this is 19th century stuff with newer technology, and you also have written a lot about the wage fixing that they've been doing, where they believe in the free market until it works against them, and then they suppress it by deciding they're not going to compete for employees. They're going to illegally suppress the right of employees to judge among competing offers. And there's been some coverage on Pando Daily of that. But now you mentioned that the people who bring us the lovable animated figures of Wall-E and the clownfish and all that are part of this, right?
Yeah, well, they actually started it, which is the incredible thing. I mean, it began in 1986, this secret and illegal agreement that violated antitrust law. The agreement was initiated between George Lucas of Lucasfilm and Pixar's heads, Ed Catmull, and Steve Jobs, who financed the spinoff of Pixar from Lucasfilm in 1986. And then Jobs became essentially the owner and CEO of Pixar after that. And they agreed to make it look. I think, first of all, another part of the story is Lucas brought his studios up north and in Northern California. I have heard a lot, and I assume as well, in part to avoid labor unions, because as we know in Hollywood, I mean, this is one of the few areas where artists and people in the arts and creative, arts, whatever you call it, are very strongly unionized or guildized, and those guilds and unions work and protect the workers there. And up in Northern California, there wasn't that. And what was Silicon Valley at that time? It was defense industry. I mean, so a lot of that same culture kind of carried over. It was kind of the technology side of the defense industry, and then eventually became Silicon Valley. And so anyway, in 86, they agreed not to poach or bid up each other's employees, or if an employee left, they would inform each other. If one employee was leaving for another and came to them to seek a job, they would inform each other at the top level.
You see, That part is really horrible. So what happened? Did Lucas just send out notes to his friends saying, don't call my employees because these are not the droids you're looking for? Or
yeah, you know, I almost, it's kind of like that. It's more like an evil Yoda. The language that he uses is very sort of, responsible it would not be. Or, I mean, it's more like he talks all this sort of ethics and responsibility and what's right. And what he's doing is essentially stealing his workers, not even just their wages, but, we're talking about a really creative industry where people want to move around for opportunities for I mean, it's tough to be a writer or an artist or anything. And one of the few payoffs is the creative, joy of being involved in a great project. And
that's a fantastic, it's a fantastic point. Also, there might be somebody who's like an AD, an assistant director on animated projects for one studio, and there might be an opportunity for him or her to realize their creative vision as a writer director somewhere else. But no, because they've colluded to prevent that.
Yep, exactly. And so what I found, again, going back to the documents, because the wage theft lawsuit that's been going on, it's still a little bit in limbo. They agreed to a settlement both sides did in the end of April for $334 million. And this involved, this is for Google, Apple, Intel, and Adobe, I believe it was. Lucasfilm and Pixar had already settled. But going back to the suit, because the judge decided she wasn't sure that the $334 million settlement figure was fair to the victims, I went back again and decided to go back to the origins of this case, which is in computer animation and the workers in that. And, it just gets really ugly all over again. I mean, there you see, I wrote about DreamWorks animation all over it. So this is DreamWorks Animation is run by Jeffrey Katzenberg, who is Obama's biggest bundler for the past two campaigns. And he is repeatedly in emails, different emails, and a testimony, their name comes up as being a participant in this illegal scheme. Yet, as far as I know, they weren't investigated by the DOJ, and they certainly weren't charged by the DOJ.
Well, I want to talk more about this and what we do about whether we nationalize these bastards or what. But when we come back after the break with Mark Ames, we'll talk more about the monopolistic, cynical collusion that goes to infinity and beyond. Mark, stick with us, please. We'll be right back. I'm Richard R.J. Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour. And we're back on The Zero Hour with Mark Ames, writer for Pando Daily, gadfly and critic of the monolithic, monopolistic Silicon Valley corporations, and good friend of the show. Mark, we've unfortunately only got about 5 minutes left, but in the time because I feel like we could go on this for hours, but
I know.
In the time we've got left, and it's so important to be talking about this stuff, I think people don't realize how massive and powerful these monopolies have become. So I wrote this piece, which was given the headline, Nationalize Google and Amazon and Facebook. I was really talking more about regulating them as public utilities, which I think is a very reasonable, balanced argument, particularly given the way they abuse their power. But what do you think? What's the solution to all of this?
I think either one of those is certainly a solution, or breaking them up, or whatever. But ultimately, I think they want us to believe that by leaving them alone, we become freer. And I think what people are learning slowly, despite the volume of propaganda that's been pumped out of Silicon Valley and Washington about free markets for the last couple of decades, that we're learning that we're becoming less free. And the only way to regain some of our political power over our lives and over our politics in this country is by reducing their power, and that means regulating them or nationalizing them or regulating or nationalizing maybe some aspect of it and regulating other aspects of it. I can't tell you what we should do, but we need to like seriously start talking about it. And I can tell you that the big tech companies, despite all the noise that they make about, net neutrality, which Google's already backing away from, they don't seem to care about net neutrality more, or all the noise that they're making about privacy or the NSA, that the one thing they fear the most and the one thing that they're gearing up for more than anything is fighting antitrust laws, and their biggest fear is that antitrust taking them apart. And they know it better than we do. They know the history of this country better than we do, it seems. But this country has a long history of not tolerating mega corporations or mega power over our lives and over our politics. And I think it's inevitable that this is going to be talked about in a serious way more and more. So your piece kind of helps bring it out into a wider audience. I thought it was great.
Oh, thanks, man. I mean, I think the important thing is to break the kind of mythology that somehow they've managed to become massive billion-dollar corporations while they've been very smart while propagating the mythology that they're disruptors. They're not disruptors. They're the ones who should be disrupted. They're the power elite, and yet they're still in this sort of, it's us against the system mode. And you also get this invisible. There was a paper I want to respond to, a piece I want to respond to called "The Invisible Economy" that says, well, we don't realize how much we get for free now. That you can people use Google News; they don't have to spend $280 for an annual newspaper subscription, but people are contributing the labor that creates Facebook and some of this other stuff. We're paying in ways we don't always see, including our privacy, including our time, including our attention. So that's why I think it's so important for guys like you to keep pushing at these guys and digging at these guys. So in the minute or two we have left, what are you working on right now? Can you say?
I still plan to do at least one or two more pieces on the Silicon Valley wage theft piece in the near future. And for next week, I have a pretty bombshell piece, I think, about some of the Koch brothers. I've been writing about them since early 2009 because they reminded Yasha Levine and me of the Russian oligarchs so much when we first came across them. And I have a piece coming out that really demonstrates their political extremism in a pretty shocking way. That's all I'll say about it right now.
Well, I hope you'll come back and talk to us about it when it comes out, because they are the other monopolistic overlords of the dystopic American future that we're trying to undo. So Mark Ames, writer for Pando Daily, advocate for all that is good and pure in the technological hell we live in. Thanks so much for joining us on the Zero Hour.
Thanks for having me on again.
You bet. And that's it for this week's episode. Bill Gates mangling the education world with his money, the tech tapas mangling all sorts of aspects of our lives, and more to come. We'll have a lot to cover. Tar sands, fracking, everything else. Thanks for joining us. As always, I'm Richard R.J. Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.